I stood behind a marble pillar at my son's wedding reception, watching my new daughter-in-law whisper to her friend, plotting to have me committed so they could take my beach house. My hand shook slightly as I ordered a double whiskey at the bar, smiling at the crowd like the perfect mother of the groom. At 63, I should have been the happiest woman alive, surrounded by family and celebration. Instead, I was plotting my own quiet response, knowing that the next few months would test everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and survival. The grand ballroom at the Riverside Country Club gleamed like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers reflected against pristine white roses, and my son David, 32, looked every bit the handsome groom in his navy tuxedo. Memories of him, as a boy, building sandcastles on the beach, crying over scraped knees, promising to always take care of me, flashed in my mind. That little boy was gone. In his place was a man who had been slowly persuaded to see me as an obstacle rather than a mother. Jessica. The woman who now held his attention laughed quietly at her friend's question about why she was planning to document my supposed decline. She's 63 and alone in that big house, she said. It's mercy. David deserves that beach house after everything she put him through. My blood turned to ice. The beach house, the one Robert and I had bought 30 years ago. The place where David had learned to surf, where we spent every summer, where Robert had proposed. I retreated behind the pillar, taking in her calculating smile. I waved politely when our eyes met, because that is what mothers do. They smile and pretend everything is fine, even when the truth is shattering. David appeared beside me, loosening his tie. Concern flashed across his face. "Mom, you look pale. Are you okay?" I smiled, steadying myself. "Just tired, sweetheart." "Long day." He nodded, distracted by his new bride leaving me to navigate the gathering storm alone. Over the past months, I had watched David change subtly at first. Sunday calls became infrequent, lunch dates were skipped, and suddenly our close bond felt strained by the quiet influence of a woman I barely knew, but whose intentions were unmistakable. 3 months earlier, David had introduced Jessica at our home. She was charming. Blonde, smiling, articulate, the kind of woman a man might be proud to bring home. She complimented my furniture, my coffee, even the antique vases Robert had collected. She laughed at my jokes, echoed my thoughts, and subtly positioned herself as someone who understood family dynamics better than I did. Within a week, she was rearranging my kitchen, offering unsolicited advice on everything from finances to gardening. David, once independent in his ways, became deferential to her opinions, taking guidance from her rather than his own mother. Within a month, they moved into my investment property, a house I had temporarily let David live in to get back on his feet after a messy breakup. They stopped contributing to the mortgage and utilities, even as luxury purchases a new BMW, and later a truck appeared under their names. Each call to David was met with excuses, blame, and a strange insistence that my expectations were controlling, that I was somehow wrong for asking him to manage his own financial responsibilities. I bit my tongue, because that is what mothers do. But hope, I learned, is fragile when faced with manipulation. The breaking point came quietly, like a whispered threat disguised as casual conversation. Jessica's previous work in social services and adult protective services, a detail I had overlooked, meant she understood exactly how to manipulate family dynamics, target vulnerabilities, and orchestrate mental health interventions to gain control over assets. I realized that her charm was a carefully constructed weapon. Her plan was methodical: isolate me, paint me as unstable, ensure her control over my son and my properties. By October, the tension had escalated enough that I knew action was necessary. I met with Thomas, our longtime family attorney, and decided to sell both the Maple Street house and the cherished beach house in Monterey. David was unaware of my plan, and legally, he could do nothing until I was gone. I also tasked Thomas with a thorough investigation into Jessica's history. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. She had a record of elder abuse and fraud in multiple states, including a 5-year-old conviction in Nevada. Every piece fit together: the manipulation, the deception, the charm, masking a dangerous pattern. As I prepared, I felt a rare clarity. For 30 years, I had navigated life carefully, raising my son, managing finances, grieving my late husband. Now faced with someone trying to weaponize my love and independence, I realized that love alone would not protect me. Strategic action, patience, and meticulous planning would. I wasn't just protecting my inheritance or property. I was protecting myself and the integrity of my family. I made phone calls to the attorney, the bank, and to someone who could assist with the deeper investigation, preparing for what I knew was coming in an attempt to commit me to paint me as incompetent, to take control of everything I had worked for. By the time David and Jessica knocked on my door that Thursday evening, I was ready, calm, and fully aware of the power I still held. The quiet storm I had been preparing to unleash would soon reveal the truth about Jessica, and ultimately protect the son I still loved deeply. The knock on the door came at 7 p.m. sharp. David and Jessica stepped in Jessica's perfect composure, in place the rehearsed warmth on her face, like a mask she thought I wouldn't see through. "Come in," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "There are some people I'd like you to meet." Their confusion was immediate, but curiosity tethered them to the doorway. Detective Morrison entered first, flanked by 2 plainclothes officers. Jessica's sharp intake of breath told me she recognized him immediately. The tension in the room was electric, and David's brow furrowed in alarm. "Hello, Jess," Danny said casually, his calm presence unsettling in its familiarity. "Been a while." Jessica's lips parted, caught somewhere between an excuse and a sneer. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, trying to regain control. I sat quietly, savoring the moment as Detective Morrison stepped forward with measured authority. "Mrs. Cooper, I'll let you handle this," he said. I nodded, allowing the truth to fall into the room like a hammer. Jessica had done this before. 3 times she had targeted wealthy families, manipulating and isolating elderly members to gain control over assets, then creating manufactured mental health crises to remove them from their own lives. Her past victims had lost everything. David's mouth opened closed, and then opened again, disbelief written across his face. "This can't be real," he whispered. I reached over and gently held his arm. "I'm afraid it is, sweetheart." Detective Morrison laid out the evidence. Her previous convictions lawsuits quietly settled, and manipulations documented in multiple states. Jessica's smile faltered, tiny cracks forming as her mask slipped. She stammered, insisting her actions had been protective, that she was safeguarding vulnerable people from families who supposedly didn't care. Each defense sounded hollow even to her own ears, and David's shock deepened. "You targeted me," he said, voice tight, almost breaking. "This whole relationship. You targeted my family." Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she tried to reclaim composure. "David, you don't understand." "I love you," she said. The lie hung in the air like smoke. Detective Morrison's presence silenced her, a reminder that her schemes were no longer private, no longer safe. I watched David's face as the weight of betrayal settled over him. He had fallen for her charm, her manipulations, convinced that she was guiding him toward maturity and responsibility, when in truth she was orchestrating a calculated takeover. I didn't say anything. I simply let the evidence speak, the documents, the criminal records, the carefully documented history of her schemes. David read them slowly, each piece a puzzle, revealing the truth of her intentions. Jessica's protests grew desperate, her voice rising. "You think you've won. My brother will never forgive you for this. You've destroyed his life just to prove you're smarter than me." I leaned back, calm and steady. "I haven't destroyed anything. I've saved my son, my family, and myself. Sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to act before it's too late." The officers led her away, her perfect composure replaced by fury and disbelief. David sank onto the couch, defeated, the illusion of control shattered. I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's over, sweetheart. She's gone, and the danger is behind us." He looked at me, his eyes heavy with guilt and regret. "I am so sorry, Mom. I let her manipulate me. I don't know how I can make this right." I took a slow breath. "You don't need to apologize for being human. You need to learn, and then move forward. That's all anyone can do." Over the next few days, David worked to repair what remained of his financial independence. He secured steady employment, began therapy, and faced the reality of the financial mess left in Jessica's wake. He was cautious, a little quieter, but more grounded than I had seen in months. Our relationship began the slow process of healing, rebuilding trust, and learning how to navigate honesty after betrayal. The beach house, my lifelong treasure, and the Maple Street home were sold, the proceeds safely secured. David winced at the news, but he understood that the lesson extended beyond property or money. It was about boundaries, respect, and recognizing manipulation before it caused irreparable harm. The emotional cost had been high, but the alternative, allowing Jessica to succeed, would have been far worse. Months later, I settled into my new beachfront condo, smaller than the properties I had sold, but infused with a peace I hadn't felt in years. The sun painted the Pacific in gold and pink, and for the first time in months, I felt a quiet satisfaction. David called me that morning, his voice steadier, brimming with cautious optimism. He had a new apartment, a new routine, and a renewed commitment to rebuilding his life honestly. I smiled, knowing that finally, we were on the right path. And there on that deck, watching the waves roll in, I realized something important. Love doesn't mean being a doormat, and motherhood doesn't mean sacrificing your own safety and sanity for those who might exploit it. Sometimes protecting your children means taking difficult actions they may not understand, standing firm when others try to manipulate your care, and trusting in your own instincts. The quiet after Jessica was gone was almost dizzying. David called less frequently at first, unsure how to speak to me after the betrayal. But the calls gradually lengthened, becoming more conversational, more natural. I started to see him on weekends, sharing meals that weren't tainted by arguments over bills, boundaries, or bad advice disguised as concern. Slowly, the trust between us, though fragile, began to rebuild. We were learning how to coexist again cautiously and deliberately, like two dancers finding rhythm after a misstep. Even as I adjusted to the calm, I couldn't ignore the ripple effect Jessica had left behind. While David recovered from her manipulation, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. It was Sarah Chen. She explained that she feared her father was being targeted by a predatory stepmother, someone with a history disturbingly similar to Jessica's. My instincts kicked in immediately. I remembered the sense of helplessness I'd felt while watching my son fall for a carefully constructed lie, and I knew that I could not sit idly by. I typed back quickly, agreeing to meet her. Protecting others became an extension of my own recent lessons. Meanwhile, Detective Morrison, who had been my secret weapon during Jessica's exposure, remained a trusted ally. He and I had worked quickly to secure evidence, prepare documents, and ensure that legal action against Jessica was airtight. Beyond that, he offered advice on how to maintain boundaries with David and enforce them gently but firmly. His presence reminded me that vigilance wasn't just about money or property. It was about safety, emotional and financial, and reclaiming control. I spent mornings on the deck of my new condo, sipping coffee and reviewing the files I had secured on Jessica. Each page, each documented lie and fraudulent transaction reinforced the reality that my instincts had been right all along. I had always trusted my judgment, and it had saved not just me but my son. It was an empowering realization, though bittersweet, as I reflected on the months of manipulation we had endured. David gradually began to share the more personal toll of Jessica's schemes. The sleepless nights, worrying about how to repay credit card debts. The embarrassment of realizing he'd been deceived. The emotional drain of trying to reconcile love for someone who had acted solely in self-interest. It had been devastating. Yet he also began to take responsibility, paying back debts and reestablishing a budget. For the first time in months, he seemed anchored, his life grounded in reality rather than illusion. One evening, as the sun lowered over the Pacific painting, the waves in soft shades of coral and amber, I reflected on the lessons learned. The danger Jessica posed wasn't just in financial loss. It was in the way she rewrote the narrative of family isolating and manipulating. And yet, by standing firm documenting every step and maintaining my own clarity, I had turned her strategy against her. The feeling of victory was tempered by empathy. I knew how easy it was to fall for someone who presented charm and concern as shields for ulterior motives. It was then that I received a call from Angela at Serenity Springs. She had copied every note from my evaluation and held it for me. I went to pick up the files, and as I sat in my condo flipping through them, I realized how critical every decision had been. The calls to Thomas, the research into Jessica's history, the careful documentation, and even the decision to comply temporarily with the evaluation process. It was a delicate dance requiring both patience and precision, but it had worked. I also began corresponding with Sarah Chen, preparing to help her safeguard her father, from the same type of predatory manipulation we had experienced. The connection was immediate. We shared strategies, advice, and emotional support. Helping Sarah gave me purpose beyond my personal recovery. It was a chance to apply the painful lessons I had learned and prevent another family from suffering the same way. David and I started rebuilding our lives together cautiously, celebrating milestones, small victories, and re-establishing old traditions in new ways. Monthly dinners became a fixture, awkward at first but gradually comfortable. Conversations about work finances and relationships were now transparent and honest. Trust, I realized, was never given. It was earned through consistency, patience, and proof of character. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. There were moments of tension, hesitations in conversations, and lingering shadows of Jessica's manipulation. But each challenge was met with awareness, communication, and reflection. We were learning not just to survive past betrayal, but to thrive in the clarity it had forced upon us. Life after trauma could still be full, meaningful, and even joyful once boundaries were respected and truth prevailed. Sitting on my deck one evening, watching the horizon burn with the colors of sunset, I finally allowed myself a deep exhale. I'd learned in the hardest possible way that love and protection required boundaries, courage, and action. Children could stumble, make mistakes, and fall for deception, but as a parent, one's duty was to guide, protect, and sometimes intervene decisively. That understanding and the peace it brought was worth every sleepless night, every pang of doubt, and every difficult choice I had faced. The weeks following Jessica's arrest were quieter than I had expected, but the calm was a relief rather than a burden. David slowly settled into his apartment, establishing a routine and reconnecting with his own independence. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the constant tension that had shadowed every interaction. Our calls and monthly dinners became a grounding ritual, a steady reminder that family could heal when honesty and boundaries were restored. I continued working with Sarah Chen, preparing strategies to protect her father. Each conversation reminded me of how skilled Jessica had been at isolating her targets. She didn't just steal money, she rewrote reality, casting doubt and confusion over anyone who might challenge her narrative. In helping Sarah, I found a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I'd missed. I was no longer just a mother reclaiming what was rightfully hers. I was a guide, a protector, someone who could spot patterns and act before damage occurred. One Saturday afternoon, I received a package from Detective Morrison. Inside were updates on Jessica's prior victims and restitution payments. Reading their stories, I felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction that justice had been served, that her schemes were finally exposed. Sorrow for those who had suffered before me, victims whose trust had been shattered and whose lives had been disrupted. But it reinforced a truth I had learned firsthand. Vigilance, preparation, and courage could prevent harm, even if the past couldn't be undone. David called later that day, his voice lighter than it had been in months. He wanted advice on a new opportunity at work, a position that finally offered stability and health benefits. I listened carefully, giving guidance where appropriate, but resisting the urge to control. It was a delicate, balanced support, without smothering counsel, without interference. He appreciated it, and for the first time I felt proud, not only as a mother, but as someone who had helped her child regain his footing after betrayal. Evenings, on my new beachfront deck, became a personal ritual. I poured a glass of wine, watched the waves, and reflected on the journey. The beach house had been a treasure, but losing it had been necessary. Not for spite, but for clarity. It was a reminder that possessions, though meaningful, were secondary to safety, dignity, and truth. Each sunset was a testament to resilience, the quiet beauty of regained control, and the satisfaction of having navigated treacherous waters with intellect and patience. One crisp morning, I met Sarah Chen in a small cafe. Her gratitude was palpable, and together we mapped out a plan to monitor her father's finances, verify professional and personal histories, and establish protective boundaries. As we spoke, I realized how much I had learned about deception, manipulation, and the importance of trust. My own experience with Jessica had been painful, but it had equipped me to prevent similar harm to others. That knowledge was invaluable, and using it brought me a sense of fulfillment that no material possession could match. David and I slowly returned to old traditions, adapting them to our new reality. We rebuilt simple rituals, morning coffee together on weekends, walks along the beach, shared meals. Trust once fractured required patience, honesty, and consistency to restore. Our conversations no longer carried the weight of suspicion or defensiveness. Instead, they carried warmth and cautious optimism. I could see in his eyes that he was learning the difference between manipulation and genuine love, between obligation and accountability. Months passed and Jessica's sentence continued. Each court update was a reminder of how far we had come. She had been removed from the equation, and David's life, once tangled in lies and deceit, was becoming his own again. For me, the victory wasn't just legal, it was emotional and moral. I had stood firm, used my resources wisely, and protected my son and myself from a woman who had underestimated both of us. On a quiet evening, I reflected on the lessons learned. Love required vigilance. Boundaries were not walls, but safety nets. Trust could be broken, but it could also be rebuilt when honesty prevailed. And age, experience, and intuition were powerful tools when wielded with clarity and purpose. I thought about the mothers who might be silently enduring manipulations, the children unaware of what they might inherit through deception, and the subtle ways control could be masked as concern. Knowledge, preparation, and courage could save lives. My phone buzzed with the message from David. Mom, dinner Sunday. Mom, let's make it our ritual. I smiled, thinking of the journey we had navigated from betrayal to clarity, from fear to empowerment. It was a reminder that even after deception and heartbreak, relationships could be restored stronger and more honest than before. The house was gone, the money secure, and Jessica behind bars, but the most important things remained trust, love, and the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. That night, I poured another glass of wine and watched the Pacific stretch into the horizon. The waves whispered of endings and beginnings, of lessons learned and wisdom earned. Being a mother didn't mean being a doormat. Loving your children didn't mean accepting abuse. And living into your 60s didn't mean surrendering control. It meant knowing when to fight, when to protect, and when to reclaim what was rightfully yours. Sunday arrived with a warm breeze and golden sunlight spilling across my beachfront condo. I set the table for David, making the space inviting, but simple, a symbol of our new chapter. When he arrived, there was a brief, awkward pause at the door, but then he smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen in months. We sat, shared a meal, and talked about ordinary things, the kind of conversations that don't carry the weight of suspicion or manipulation. It felt miraculous, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was honest. As we lingered over dessert, David paused and met my gaze. Mom, I've been thinking about everything that happened. Jessica, the houses, the lies. I was blind. I didn't see how smart she was, how she manipulated me. I'm so sorry for doubting you. His voice was quiet but firm. I didn't doubt your love. I doubted myself, and I let her twist that against both of us. I reached across the table and took his hand. Sweetheart, what matters is that you see clearly now. The past can't be changed, but we can build from here. He nodded, and in that moment, I felt the warmth of trust returning like a tide, slow but unstoppable. Weeks later, I met with Sarah Chen again. Her father's situation required vigilance, but with the lessons I'd learned from Jessica, we were proactive rather than reactive. Together, we established secure finances, verified employment histories, and monitored interactions. Sarah's relief was palpable, but so was her gratitude. Maggie, I don't know what we would have done without you, she said, tears in her eyes. You've saved my father from the same trap you escaped. I smiled, understanding the weight of her words. Sometimes experience isn't just for yourself, it's a shield for others. David continued to rebuild his life, embracing responsibility and independence. The credit card debts he had accumulated during Jessica's schemes were slowly repaid. He found stability in a new career, reconnected with old friends, and even volunteered at a local center to help families navigate financial decisions. Watching him grow, I realized that adversity, though painful, could catalyze maturity. The lessons he had learned were harder than any lecture could teach, but they were his, and he was embracing them fully. I spent more time on my deck overlooking the Pacific. The sunsets reminded me of impermanence and renewal, that life's beauty could coexist with its hardships. I often thought of the women I had spoken to, mothers like me quietly enduring manipulation, silently wondering if they could ever reclaim control. I wanted to share my story to let them know that age, experience, and intuition were weapons against deceit, and that love didn't require surrendering your boundaries. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Detective Morrison. "Mrs. Cooper just wanted to update you. Jessica's restitution process has begun, and a few of her previous victims are finally seeing some compensation. More importantly, she's off the streets, unable to harm anyone else for the time being." Relief washed over me. Justice had its limitations, but for now it had been served. I thanked him quietly, acknowledging the network of allies that had helped me navigate a situation that had once seemed insurmountable. David and I planned small celebrations acknowledging milestones, rather than grand gestures. His first month, fully independent, was marked with a modest dinner. His new apartment, once a symbol of temporary exile, became a place of stability and pride. Each step he took toward self-sufficiency was a reminder that resilience, even after betrayal, was possible. I watched him carefully, not with suspicion, but with pride. We had weathered storms, and the horizon looked clear. Reflecting on the past year, I realized the depth of what I had learned. Being a mother meant loving fiercely, but it also meant protecting your own life and dignity. Forgiveness was powerful, but so was action. Trust had to be earned, and boundaries weren't signs of weakness. They were shields that preserved self-respect. I thought of the times I had hesitated, the moments of doubt, and the eventual clarity that had guided every decisive step I took. It had been a costly lesson, but invaluable. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Pacific horizon, painting the waves in shades of gold and pink, I raised my glass in a quiet toast to mothers who fight for their children's lives while protecting their own. To children who learn that love is more than affection. It's honesty, respect, and accountability. To the unexpected endings that, when handled with courage and clarity, become new beginnings. Life was never perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I knew the value of vigilance, the strength of experience, and the unyielding power of a mother who refuses to be manipulated. The lesson was clear. Love doesn't mean submission, and age doesn't mean helplessness. It means knowing when to fight, when to protect, and when to reclaim what is rightfully yours. If you found this story meaningful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and wisdom. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories and experiences. Remember, your voice matters, and knowing your worth is the first step in protecting it.